Hello everyone and welcome back to JT on the Go. Today we are back in the National Museum of African American History and Culture located in Washington, D.C. This is part 2 of my 3-part series of the museum. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd recommend watching that first before watching part 2. In part 2, we will be covering the time frame from 1877 to 1968. In this video, we will be talking about a form of systematic oppression in the form of segregation, separate but equal, along with some of our famous civil rights leaders. After the Civil War ended, the South was in ruins and all of their slaves were now free. But in the South, they still disagreed with African Americans' place in society. At this point, the former slaves were homeless and without a job. When Lincoln's Vice President Andrew Johnson took over after Lincoln was assassinated, he stood by while Southern leaders enacted black codes. Black codes, in common terms, limited the rights of former slaves and allowed discrimination to occur. Former slaves could not go to school, they were not hired to work, and they were not treated equally. This meant they needed special permits to travel or to work anywhere besides a farm, but many whites at this time found it hard to accept former slaves as equal. After black codes were created, the South also created Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws basically made separate public facilities in the United States for African Americans. From 1877 to 1968, blacks had to endure this form of legalized government oppression. In public, there were whites only and colored only sections. This included movie theaters, restaurants, transportation, water fountains, hospitals, neighborhoods, banking, and even schools, in a country where all men are created equal. Jim Crow is a fictional black puppet that was in the film Birth of a Nation. In the film, it showed him scaring a white woman. Because of this, the KKK, or the White Brotherhood, was formed. They were the most hateful against black people. The uniforms that you would see them in came from the religious festival Holy Week in Seville, Spain. They are called penitents. In the US, they just took it and used it as a form of terror in the South until all of the southern states came back into the Union. For blacks, the slightest move, even looking at a white person, would get them hanged at the time. Blacks felt very unsafe, and they began moving to the north in what is called the Great Migration. When the U.S. entered World War I, more than 380,000 African Americans served in the Army during World War I. 200,000 were sent to fight in Europe. Despite this, they were not being treated equal to their white counterparts. They were fighting for freedoms they themselves did not enjoy at home. At this very time, W.E.B. Du Bois founded the NAACP. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is a civil rights organization in the United States. In 1941, blacks began fighting in World War II. More than 1 million African American men and women served in every branch in the U.S. Armed Forces. One of my favorite parts of this is the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were America's first black military pilots. They flew hundreds of dangerous missions in Africa and Europe. When they applied for the U.S. Armed Forces, they were rejected at first, but they later let them fight. These pilots were good at fighting and shooting down German warplanes. Some of their famous missions were protecting U.S. bombers to get to their target. Despite this, when they came back home, they were not treated with the same respect as the white pilots. Because of this, President Harry S. Truman became the first president to address the NAACP. He promised that the federal government would act now to end discrimination, violence, and race prejudice in American life. This map shows all of the cities that had some form of Jim Crow laws. Almost every big city that is listed on this map was segregated, as most of America. We are now talking about Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who lived in Chicago with his family. In the summer of 1955, he went on vacation to visit family in Money, Mississippi. One day, he went shopping at a store where he whistled at Carolyn Bryant Donham. After that, she told her husband Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Milan. Then one night, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milan and a third person abducted Emmett Till from his uncle's house. Then they attacked and killed him. Then they threw Emmett Till's body down a river. When his body was later found, he was beaten to unrecognition. Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, invited David Jackson, who was a photographer, to take this photo that you see on the screen. When it came time to Emmett Till's funeral, Mamie Till Mobley decided to have an open casket funeral service, basically a wake or a viewing. She wanted the world to see what they did to her son. Today, Emmett Till is buried at Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois, in the Chicago Metroplex area. As for Roy and J.W., both were arrested, but there was an all-white jury in the courtroom and they got away with it. As for Caroline Bryant Donham, during the making of this video, she passed away on April 25th, 2023. For Emmett Till's casket, it was dug up at the place he was buried. They put him in another casket and they refurbished this one that he was buried in. Then they put it on display at the African American Museum. This was the only part of the museum that we were not allowed to video or take pictures of because it was a sad story. They also don't want you to talk when you're in the section where the coffin is. In 2022, a 9-foot tall bronze statue of Emmett Till was unveiled in Greenwood, Mississippi in Emmett Till's honor. It was revealed on October 21st, 2022. Emmett Till's death also pushed Rosa Parks to do more to end segregation. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the Montgomery bus system. Then she was arrested and sent to jail. There were people before her that did the same thing. One of them was Claudette Colvin. She was the first recorded person to refuse to give up her seat. She got arrested too. After Rosa Parks got arrested, the boycott of the Montgomery bus system began. Going back to this map, Montgomery was one of the many cities that had segregated buses. Malcolm X was an American Muslim minister and human rights activist who was a prominent but one of the most misunderstood figures during the civil rights movement. He believed that black people should protect themselves and use violence if necessary. He was also the leader for the Nation of Islam until 1964. The most well-known civil rights leader was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He later became a pastor because some of his family members owned the church he was the pastor of. While he was in college at Boston University, he met his wife, Coretta Scott. He found out they rode transportation a bit more freely in the North. After he got married, he moved with Coretta to Montgomery, Alabama. But at this very time, thousands had refused to ride the buses for over a year. Dr. King's house was bombed and he was thrown in jail along with many other protesters. When King heard about the killing of Emmett Till, he used it as an example of how evil racial injustice was. He said Emmett Till's murder must be one of the most brutal and inhuman crimes of the 20th century. When Dr. King became a civil rights leader, he used the peaceful protest ideas from Mahatma Gandhi, who freed India from British rule. Unlike Malcolm X, Dr. King used peaceful protests like the March on Washington in 1963. Then he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech at the 18th step of the Lincoln Memorial, which is not far from this museum. This is a reason why Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize. During this fight, people practice sit-ins in restaurants. This means they sit in the whites-only restaurants. They sat until they were served or until the place closed. Some were arrested for doing this. It's not just black people doing this. Some white people that believed all men were created equal were also participating in these protests. One example of whites-only sections and colored-only sections is the Southern Railway. Trains began being segregated in July of 1990, and it ended on January 10th, 1956. In the stations, there were whites-only waiting rooms and colored-only waiting rooms. One of the segregated coaches was taken, refurbished, and put for display in the museum. We will be walking through this coach, and I want you to pay attention to how the conductor acts in this recreation of announcements to the white and black passengers.
So how did you do this? I did rather well, my common crop. How about you?
Yeah, me too. You put extra weight.
My daughter's debutante.
Nice seats.
Tickets, please. Tickets, ma'am. Thank you kindly. Ladies and gentlemen, tickets. That's what we're doing, so.
Excuse me, conductor. This is a long trip, and I want to smoke my cigar.
Tickets. Tickets now.
I can't wait any longer to use the bathroom. Is there another one we can use?
No, honey. This is the only one we're allowed to use on the train.
As you heard, the conductor was being nice, polite, and using the word please in the whites only section. But when he gets into the colored section of the coach, he acts all mean and is just demanding stuff. The whites only section had overhead bins, luggage racks, and a lounge area. The colored section didn't have any of that. So now you know how different traveling by train was back in the day compared to how it is today. This is an example of separate but equal. In this picture, you can see that only a third of the coach is colored while the rest is white only, more separate but equal. We will now be talking about the Hidden Figures. They were famous for their role in the early years of the space race. The pictures on the top are the real Hidden Figures, while the ones on the bottom were the ones in the movie Hidden Figures. Left to right is listed. The woman on the left is Mary Jackson. She was an engineer. Her husband was also a civil rights worker. The woman in the middle was Katherine Johnson, who used her analytic geometry skills to calculate the trajectories of the space missions. The most famous was the launch of John Glenn. Glenn wouldn't have come back without Katherine Johnson's calculations. Katherine would later go on to calculate the trajectory for the Apollo and Space Shuttle programs. The woman on the right was Dorothy Vaughan. She was famous for figuring out how to operate the computers because the computers played a key role in the space race, like when sending the man to the moon. However, all three of these women had to work harder and overcome more obstacles than their white counterparts. But it is thanks to these three women that made us win the space race. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It has taken over 188 years since All Men Are Created Equal was written, and President LBJ is signing legislation for black citizens to have equal rights. The United States is not a monarchy or a dictatorship, but one that was founded on the basics of equality. Equality that has been legally denied to black citizens for almost 200 years. On August 30th, 1967, Thurgood Marshall became the first black Supreme Court justice. He was selected by Lyndon B. Johnson. LBJ believed that all men were created equal. Now civil rights is over. We will discuss the time frame from 1968 to the present day in the next episode.